Spring, 1941. The Channel air is restless. The clouds heavy with smoke and salt. A German ace squints through his canopy, eyes sharp from years of combat. He has seen Spitfires before, dozens of them, twisting and burning below his gun sight. But this one moves differently. Its wings slice the air with a confidence that feels new. He rolls his FW-190 into position, radial engine growling like a predator ready to strike. Yet the Spitfire doesn't shy away. Instead, it banks sharply, nose high, and hangs in the sky longer than physics should allow. For the first time, the German ace hesitates. The butcher bird, the pride of the Luftwaffe, has finally met something it can't swat down so easily. And in that moment, the legend of the FW-190 collides with the undying spirit of the Spitfire. But how did a machine meant to dominate the skies leave its own aces stunned, their confidence shaken, their kill tallies stalled? The answer lies in a story of innovation, desperation, and the most intimate kind of warfare. Man against man, machine against machine, duel after duel in the thin blue air over Europe. Section 1. The arrival of the butcher bird. The FW-190 arrived like a thunderclap. First introduced in 1941, it was unlike anything the Royal Air Force had faced. Sleek, yet muscular, it bore the scars of a new kind of engineering, one focused on raw power and brutal efficiency. Its BMW radial engine thundered with nearly 2,000 horsepower. Its four 20mm cannons and two machine guns gave it the punch of a flying fortress in miniature. Luftwaffe pilots called it the Würger, the butcher bird. A predator from German folklore, it was said to impale its prey on thorns. The name fit. From the moment the FW-190 entered combat over France and the Channel, RAF pilots felt the sting. Their Spitfire Mark V's suddenly seemed dated. German pilots reported that in almost every performance metric, roll rate, acceleration, climb, the FW-190 had the edge. It could dive away at will, snap roll out of a trap, or pounce from above with vicious speed. For Luftwaffe aces hardened by years of victories over the Channel, it was intoxicating. After the bruising battles of the Battle of Britain, here at last was a fighter that restored their swagger. They laughed in briefings, boasting that the RAF had no answer. But pride has a way of blinding men. For in the skies over Kent and Sussex, whispers began to spread among British pilots. Whispers that the Spitfire, though bloodied, was far from finished. And that the butcher bird, as sharp as its talons seemed, might soon find itself hunted. The first clashes came like lightning strikes. Summer, 1941. The Channel glittered below, deceptively calm. Above it, the air was anything but. The FW-190s had finally been unleashed in numbers, and the RAF quickly realized something was wrong. Spitfire Mark V's, once the pride of fighter command, were being torn apart. Pilots who had survived the Battle of Britain, men with medals pinned to their tunics, suddenly found themselves outpaced, outgunned, and outrolled. One recalled, "The 190 could dive like a brick and roll like a gymnast. We couldn't touch it." The reports from squadron leaders were blunt, almost despairing. In a turning fight, the Spitfire could still hold its own, but in every other respect, the climb rate, the acceleration, the ability to dictate when to fight, the FW-190 had the advantage. It wasn't just numbers on a chart. It was the grim reality of Spitfires falling in flames over Dover. Veteran Luftwaffe aces like Josef Priller and Hans Hahn cut through RAF formations, their confidence swelling with each kill. Propaganda in Berlin hailed the new fighter as untouchable, the master of the Western Front. British pilots had a darker name for it, the slaughter period. For months, every encounter seemed the same. The FW-190s appeared out of the sun, struck hard, and vanished in dives Spitfires couldn't follow. Squadron morale wavered. Some young pilots admitted that when they spotted the blunt-nosed German fighter, their stomachs turned to lead. Yet in the smoke and loss, something else stirred. RAF commanders refused to concede. They ordered intelligence units to capture every scrap of data on the new German machine engine notes, wing design, tactics overheard from prisoners. Somewhere, somehow, a counterstroke would come. And while German aces toasted their victories in French chateaus, the RAF's engineers and test pilots were already sketching a response. A machine that would shock the Luftwaffe in ways they never expected. By late 1941, the situation was desperate. The RAF knew it couldn't bleed forever against the FW-190. Something had to change, and fast. But Britain was exhausted. Factories strained under bombing raids. Resources were thin. Designing a brand new fighter from scratch would take years the RAF didn't have. So engineers turned to the only option left: evolve the Spitfire and do it in secrecy. At the heart of this gamble was the Merlin 61 engine. Rolls-Royce had been experimenting with a two-stage supercharger that could deliver more power at higher altitudes. The Spitfire's elegant frame, Mitchell's legacy, could carry it just barely. The result was the Spitfire Mark IX. It wasn't born in neat blueprints and endless testing. It was an improvisation, a stopgap. Old Mark V airframes were literally ripped open, gutted, and rebuilt around the new engine. Wings were strengthened, radiators re-angled, every rivet hammered with urgency. Pilots who first flew it were stunned. At last, here was a Spitfire that could meet the FW-190 head-on. It could climb almost as fast, dive nearly as hard, and in the hands of an experienced pilot, twist away from the German fighter in a tight turn. The Mark IX wasn't perfect. Its cockpit visibility was still cramped compared to the German canopy. It lacked the sheer ruggedness of the FW-190's radial engine, which could take bullets and keep running. But in one vital sense, it restored balance. RAF pilots once again had faith that if they met the butcher bird, they stood a fighting chance. And that faith spread faster than any statistic. In mess halls across southern England, pilots whispered about the new Spitfire as though it were a weapon forged in myth. German aces had laughed at the RAF's desperation. But soon, their laughter would fade. For the Spitfire, Mark IX was waiting, silent, patient, eager to prove itself in blood and fire. The true test of any fighter is not in blueprints or factories. It is in the hands of the men who fly them. By 1942, the skies over northern France became dueling grounds. Veteran Luftwaffe aces, many with 50 or more kills to their names, suddenly found themselves matched against Spitfire Mark IXs flown by equally determined RAF leaders. The air war became personal. Take Hans Hahn, a rising star of the Luftwaffe. He entered one fateful mission brimming with confidence. He had tasted victory after victory in his FW-190, boasting to comrades that no British pilot could withstand his strikes. That day, he engaged a pair of Spitfires head-on, expecting the usual dance of domination. But the Spitfire Mark IX didn't crumble. It climbed with him, rolled with him, forced him into maneuvers that bled his energy. Hahn, once predator, found himself prey. He barely escaped, shaken, muttering to his wingman that the RAF had a new trick. Not long after, his luck ran out. Hahn was shot down and captured. To the Germans, it was unthinkable one of their best, stunned and humbled. And then there was Johnny Johnson, a British ace whose coolness under fire became legendary. He called the FW-190 a wolf, a machine that demanded respect. But Johnson also believed that discipline and teamwork could tame the wolf. His squadrons learned to lure FW-190s into turning contests, where the Spitfire's agility shone. Johnson's logbook filled with victories over the butcher bird, each kill a reminder that the balance of fear was shifting. These duels weren't fought in numbers. They were fought in seconds, split-second choices at 300 miles an hour. A snap roll here, a dive there. One wrong move, and smoke trailed behind your tail. For the aces, it was more than pride, it was survival. And as the months dragged on, more Luftwaffe pilots who once laughed at British flying coffins began to sweat when the radio crackled. Spitfires, 10 o'clock high. The age of easy victories was over. The Spitfire Mark IX may have given the RAF the hardware to fight back, but hardware alone never wins a war. It was the tactics, the way men adapted in the heat of battle, that truly began to unsettle the Luftwaffe's aces. Early encounters taught a harsh lesson. Meet the FW 190 inches of vertical climb, and you were finished. The German fighter could rocket skyward, roll onto its back, and dive with a ferocity that tore the Spitfire from the sky, so the RAF adjusted. Instead of trying to follow the German aces' playbook, they wrote their own. Squadrons began favoring horizontal turns, forcing fights into the Spitfire's domain. The Spit could carve tighter arcs, almost dancing in the sky. British pilots learned to bait their opponents, feinting a climb, then snapping into a vicious turn that left the FW-190 overshooting. Formations changed too. Gone was the tight Vic of 3 aircraft, so vulnerable in earlier battles. In its place came the Finger 4. 4 planes spread like the fingers of a hand. Each pilot had space to maneuver. Each could cover the other's blind spots. The Luftwaffe had pioneered it, but now the RAF perfected it. Surprise also became a weapon. RAF controllers directed squadrons to dive from high altitude, striking FW-190s before they could. Choose the terms of battle. Once, German pilots had been the hunters. Now, they often found themselves startled prey. Even technology played a role. British ground radar grew sharper, giving controllers the ability to vector Spitfires directly into the path of incoming raiders. Luftwaffe aces, once so confident in ambush, began to sense that the tables were turning, and with every tactical shift, the fear grew. FW-190 veterans admitted privately that dogfights were no longer certain wins. As one German ace muttered after a narrow escape, "We underestimated them. They learned too quickly." The Spitfire wasn't just catching up. It was forcing the Luftwaffe to rethink everything it thought it knew about air combat. By 1943, the swagger that had once defined the Luftwaffe's FW-190 units began to fade. What had started as a predator's reign over the Channel was now eroding under the steady pressure of the RAF's evolving Spitfires. The Mark IX had proven it could meet the Butcherbird head-on. But then came the Griffin-powered Spitfires, the Mark 14 with raw speed that eclipsed even the FW-190's best traits. Suddenly, the aircraft the Germans had mocked as delicate, even outdated, was climbing past them, diving harder, and snapping into turns that left smoke trails marking German losses. Attrition only deepened the wound. The Luftwaffe could not replace its veteran aces fast enough. Men who had survived, Spain, Poland, France, masters of the air, were falling, one by one. In their place came boys barely trained, thrust into cockpits with a few dozen hours of flight time, told to face seasoned RAF squadrons that now brimmed with confidence. For the young German pilot, the FW-190 was no longer a ticket to easy glory. It was a coffin with wings. Rumors spread through the mess halls. The Spitfire is untouchable now. Some whispered that engaging one head-on was suicide. Others claimed the RAF's radar and tactics meant every mission was a gamble, every patrol a trap. The aces who remained carried the burden of pride. They still claimed the FW-190's superior, still boasted of its firepower and toughness. And in some ways it was true. The Butcherbird could take punishment that would shred a Merlin engine to pieces. Its cannons could still cut a bomber in half with a single burst. But in the shifting tide of 1943, superiority no longer belonged to the Luftwaffe. Where once RAF pilots trembled at the sight of the FW-190, now it was the German who tightened his grip on the stick when the call came over the radio. Spitfires. High above. Domination had given way to doubt, and doubt, in war, is as deadly as any bullet. When the smoke of battle clears, what remains is not just wreckage, but memory, and memory is a slippery thing. Among Luftwaffe veterans, the FW-190 was still spoken of with reverence. Some aces swore it was always superior to the Spitfire. That defeats came not from the machine, but from overwhelming odds or fuel shortages. In their telling, the butcher bird was never beaten in a fair fight. Pride, after all, was the only thing left to cling to when the Reich lay in ruins. But Allied pilots told another story. For them, the FW-190 was a nightmare turned into a challenge, a beast that forced them to sharpen their skills, to adapt, to become better than they had ever imagined. Men like Johnny Johnson remembered it not with bitterness, but with respect. It was a worthy opponent, he later wrote, but never invincible. And then there were the myths that neither side could fully prove or dismiss. Tales of impossible maneuvers, of lone duels high above the clouds where one fighter simply vanished, leaving only rumors to drift down with the contrails. Historians still debate the numbers. Which fighter truly held the edge? Was it the FW-190's rugged toughness, its firepower, its blistering roll rate, or the Spitfire's agility, its relentless evolution, its ability to always come back with a stronger mark? The truth is buried somewhere between pride and propaganda. For the men who flew them, superiority was not an abstract measurement. It was the difference between walking back to the mess that night or being cut from the wreckage of a burning fuselage. But there is one certainty. Both machines, in their own way, achieved legend. The FW-190 for the fear it inspired, the Spitfire for the hope it carried. And together, their rivalry forged the stories pilots still tell of duels where seconds felt like lifetimes and where the line between myth and memory blurred forever. In the end, the story of the FW-190 and the Spitfire was never just about machines. It was about men, their courage, their fear, their pride, and their survival. The FW-190 entered the war like a wolf loosed from its chain, tearing into the skies with confidence and ferocity. For a time, it seemed untouchable, a predator that left the RAF scrambling for answers. German aces reveled in its power, certain they had seized the future of air combat, but the Spitfire refused to die. Again and again, it returned not as the same machine, but as something stronger, faster, and sharper. It embodied Britain's stubborn resilience, beaten down, bloodied, but never broken. When they clashed, the sky itself became a crucible, ace against ace, tactic against tactic. Some duels ended in triumph, others in tragedy. Yet each encounter carved another line into the legend of two of history's greatest fighters. Ask the Luftwaffe veteran, and he'll tell you the FW-190 was unmatched. Ask the RAF pilot, and he'll swear the Spitfire was the soul of the air war. Both are right, and both are wrong, because the truth is simpler and deeper. The FW-190 was feared. The Spitfire was unforgettable, and long after the echoes of cannon fire faded, their rivalry left behind something more enduring than victory, a symbol, a reminder that even in the darkest years of war, men rose into the sky, strapped themselves into fragile cockpits, and fought not just for domination, but for survival, for country, and for honor. That is why, today, when you see the silhouette of a Spitfire gliding across a summer sky, or the squat, powerful frame of an FW-190 on display in a museum hangar, you feel something stir. It isn't nostalgia, it isn't even history. It's memory. Memory of an age when machines became legends, and legends became immortal. The FW-190 may have been the predator, but the Spitfire became the symbol of the sky.